Hi everyone, and welcome to the channel, and I'm here for another throwback list video for you guys. Now for this list, I'll be going over, in my opinion, some of the best rock and metal albums of the year 2013. Now 2013 I thought was a very solid year for music. Now unfortunately, if it was still 2013, only one of these albums I really cared about. Because I think I could speak for a lot of people when I say that, you know, my tastes have really expanded since 2013. Most of these albums, when they came out, I probably could care less about. But obviously, we all go through that phase, and we eventually get into more subgenres and more styles of music in general as time progresses, of course. So, yeah, with that being said, this list is in no particular order, and if your list is different than mine, that's totally fine with me. Just feel free to leave your list in the comments. So with that being said, I think we'll start off with the album that I did hear in 2013, the year it came out. And that album is from the band Red. Now, Red is a band that does mean a lot to me. And the album that they released in 2013 is, of course, Release the Panic. I remember being very excited for this album when it was coming out. And I know most Red fans say that this is Red's worst album, which I used to agree with, but nowadays I don't agree with. I personally would take this album over Gone and Declaration, to be honest. And yeah, this album, I don't think it's as bad as some people make it out to be. Now, maybe it's just bias and nostalgia for me, because you do have to understand that around this time, I was really massive on Red at this time. You know, I even saw them on this tour, and I was listening to Red a lot, and I consider them one of my favorites, if not my favorite band at the time. But yeah, this is a pretty good album, even though it's not one of Red's best. Obviously, it's a little different compared to the stuff that Red came out with before this. The album is obviously more experimental, and if you're into, I guess, rock music or hard rock that incorporates more electronics and stuff, you might like this. Obviously, that's part of the reason why some people say that this is Red's weakest album, but the album I don't think is as bad as some people make it out to be. There's some very good songs on the album, like Perfect Life, If We Only, So Far Away, and Glass House. All really good songs. Again, not Red's best album by any means, but I still think it's good for what it is. So, Release the Panic by Red. So next we got some Trivium. Trivium, I think, is one of the best metal bands of the 2000s, in my opinion. And of course, the album that they released in 2013 is their album Vengeance Falls, of course, produced by David Draiman. And, you know, this album has a more metallic sound to it, I think. And the same could really be said for a lot of albums that released in the year 2013. That's something that I have noticed with other bands as well. But yeah, with Trivium and Vengeance Falls, it's not a bad album. Now, I feel like most people do say that this is one of Trivium's weakest albums, like in the top 3 worst Trivium albums, which I would agree with that for sure. But even in saying that, I don't think that the album is bad by any means. Trivium has no weak album, in my opinion anyway. But with this album, you got really good songs. The title track, Strife, of course, one of their most popular songs. No Way to Heal, Through Blood and Dirt and Bone. Really good stuff. So, Vengeance Falls by Trivium. I think it's a really good album, even though it's not one of Trivium's best. So next, we got some Killswitch Engage. Obviously, a very influential metalcore band. Anytime metalcore is usually brought up in discussions and whatnot, Killswitch Engage is a band that's brought up a lot, and for good reason. So, of course, the album from Killswitch Engage that's on this list is their album Disarm the Descent. Of course, the comeback album with Jesse Leach back on vocals. Very good album. I know there's a lot of people that say that this is one of Killswitch Engage's best. Would I agree with that? Maybe, I don't know. It is a bit of a tough call, but this is a very strong album nonetheless. Of course, you got really great songs. Beyond the Flames, The New Awakening, In Due Time, The Call, and No End in Sight, and Always. Yeah, there's a lot of really good stuff on this album, so if you like metalcore and haven't heard this album yet, you have to check it out. I mean, Killswitch Engage, I think, is an essential metalcore band. I mean, if you call yourself a fan of metalcore, you really gotta check out Killswitch Engage and really look more into their discography. So, Disarm the Descent by Killswitch Engage, definitely a very good album. Okay, so next we got some Black Sabbath. Black Sabbath, in my opinion, is one of the most essential metal bands. Obviously a legendary band, and this band, unfortunately, is not making any new music anymore, but I'll tell you what, they had a very good run, I think. And this was their final album, and of course the album that I'm talking about is 13 by Black Sabbath. You know, this album actually grew on me a lot over time, because when I first listened to it, I was not as into it as much, but the more I kept giving certain songs chances, the more I ended up really enjoying the album. Of course, you got really great songs on here. End of the Beginning, Loner, Age of Reason, Live Forever. Definitely a lot of really good stuff. So 13 by Black Sabbath, not Black Sabbath's best work in my opinion, but very strong album for sure. And this kind of sees Black Sabbath kind of going back to their roots a little bit. Obviously, this is when Ozzy returned. I mean, I'm really glad that Ozzy returned for the final Black Sabbath album. So 13, definitely a very good album, I think. So next, we got Fate's Warning and their album, Darkness in a Different Light. Fate's Warning are obviously legends in progressive metal, and they're obviously one of the pioneers of progressive metal. If you call yourself a fan of progressive metal, I do think that you should check out Fate's Warning. This album here, it is one of their weakest in my opinion, but even in saying that, it's not bad. I still think it's a pretty good album overall. I mean, you got the song Firefly, which is probably the best song on the album in my opinion. Lighthouse isn't too bad. Into the Black is pretty good. I mean, there is some very good songs on the album, but just this album just is missing something, I think. Like, it doesn't have that same soul or that same feeling that you get from a lot of other Fate's Warnings albums. I mean, there's just something missing about this album. It's just not as musically interesting as the other albums. But for what the album is, it's still very good. I mean, the whole band does a good job at everything that they do. I mean, there's no denying the talent in these guys. And even in this album, you know, and, you know, the really good instrumentation that's going on here. But I don't know, it's just not one of their best. And I think there's a lot of people that can agree with that. This was also their first album in a good number of years, too, I believe. I guess you could say it's their comeback album. But yeah, not a bad album. I think it's pretty good. So, Darkness in a Different Light by Fate's Warning. Definitely a very good album, and it deserved a place on the list. Okay, so next we got some Queensryche. Queensryche is a really great band from the 80s. Definitely check these guys out if you haven't already, especially if you're a fan of metal from the 1980s. And the album that's on this list is, of course, Queensryche's self-titled album, Queensryche. The first album with Todd Latour on vocals. And you know what? Todd Latour really had something to succeed with this album. Obviously, I was not a fan of Queensryche at this time, but I can only imagine what the fans were thinking around this time. You know, this was like a huge turning point for Queensryche. It's like, okay, you know, they can't fail at this. They got one chance at not failing at this, because obviously the last few albums with Jeff Tate have not been very good. So Todd Latour really had a lot to make up for Queensryche, and this album really did show that Todd Latour is a very good fit for Queensryche. At the time, I think that this is Queensryche's best album since Promised Land, to be quite honest with you. Yeah, so it has been their best album in a good number of years, and this was a step in the right direction for sure. There's so many good songs on this album. Of course, you got Where Dreams Go to Die, In This Light, Spore, Fallout, and Open Road. I mean, there's a lot of really good songs on the album. So yeah, very good return to form for Queensryche as well. So if you're someone that hasn't been happy with Queensryche because of the later day Jeff Tate material, give this album a chance. And the other two albums with Todd Latour. So Queensryche, the self-titled album, very strong album. So this album had to make the list. Okay, so the last album that's on this list is from Dream Theater, who is probably my favorite progressive metal band. And this is another album where it's kind of different in terms of, you know, sound-wise, because in this album, once again, it sounds more metallic, I guess. But, of course, the album that's up next and last on this list is Dream Theater in their self-titled album. Yeah, very good album for sure. Not one of their best by any means, but I still think it's good, though. There's a lot of people that can agree that this is just not one of their best, but it still is very good, though. Of course, you got really great songs on here, like The Enemy Inside, which is maybe one of Dream Theater's heaviest tracks. Of course, you got other really good songs on here, like Along for the Ride, which is more of a power ballad. I really like that one. And of course, Illumination Theory, one of the longest Dream Theater tracks, and I really enjoy that one too. Definitely one of the best songs on the album. But yeah, Dream Theater, the self-titled album, definitely very good. So yeah, not one of their best, but definitely a good album though, and worthy of being on the list for sure. I mean, it's Dream Theater. You can't go wrong with them. So with that being said, that's my list for the best albums of the year 2013. So let me know what you think. Do you agree with my picks? Do you agree with some of my picks? Feel free to let me know. So with that being said, thanks for watching. Have a nice day and take care.